Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door Net Admin. I had a couple of interesting conversations this week, and I'm going to start with a conversation I was having with my dad. He works in an education context, and they have a bunch of machines that are for the kids. But he was also talking a little bit about some of the difficulties that they were having with their own laptops. And I'm being the technician and just listening to this and going, okay, well, that sounds interesting. He's going, yeah, it's difficult. We can't seem to do a whole lot with these. Um, Everything is supposed to be in the cloud, and it's difficult to work with things. And then there's some data which we're not allowed to store in the cloud by law. So I have to use a USB stick to save that. And I'm going, okay, well, hang on. What about your local storage? What about installing other applications and whatnot? And as we were talking, I suddenly went, wait a minute. Are these Chromebooks? And he went, yeah, I think so. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, for kids, I get that. It's very common in an educational context to have a bunch of Chromebooks for kids because they are relatively lightweight. They're essentially just a browser. That's all Chrome OS is a browser. Um, I'll back that up just a second. Chrome OS is technically more than a browser. You can also install Android applications off of the Google Play Store, and you can enable a couple of other things for development environments, but mostly it's just a browser. It's entirely designed to work with the Google Apps ecosystem. And so you're expected to connect it to Google Drive for file storage, Gmail for email, Google Sheets for any spreadsheets, Google Docs for any word processing, etc. And that's basically it, which makes it great for kids in an educational context where you're teaching them to work with it. The less local storage you have to worry about, the better. The easier they are to wipe and reload, the better. And the more locked down it is, the less you have to worry about things like malware, the less you need to worry about high system requirements and all the rest of that. So there's a valid reason to have those. But usually I wouldn't see staff trying to use that at a school. So I said, you've got Chromebooks. Okay, I get that. That's for the kids, right? He says, yeah, the kids have Chromebooks. Okay, cool. And the staff? And he said, well, it's the same thing. I mean, I think ours are a couple years newer, but yeah, no, it's the same thing. I said, why are you using Chromebooks? He goes, I don't know. Somebody bought them probably because they were cheap. And I was taken back to a conversation I had with a different friend who was looking to replace a laptop. And part of the discussion that we had was she pointed at, something she saw in the local Best Buy. And she says, how about this one? This one's really cheap. Looks like it could be within my budget. And I looked at it and I went, well, that's not a laptop. That's a Chromebook. Well, what's the difference? And so I broke it down at the time saying, in my mind, a Chromebook and a laptop are two separate things because a Chromebook is not open. A Chromebook is very much only Chrome OS. They have the ability to run a Linux virtual environment if you enable developer mode and do that. Okay, that's kind of like Windows subsystem for Linux. You can get a Linux environment on there, but it's a virtual environment, and that's about it. Well, you can install applications for Android. These are intended for use on phones, maybe at best on a tablet. But they're not particularly designed for the desktop operating environment that you're expecting to have on a laptop. And you certainly don't get to just install arbitrary applications however you want. Yes, you can if you want to put the entire machine into developer mode and then reflash the firmware. You can do other things with Chromebook hardware, but you have to do a lot of this extra work just to essentially break into the hardware. And certainly, staff at a school are not particularly interested in doing that just to be able to get something that works. My friend definitely isn't interested in having to jump through all of these hoops to get something that will allow them to work with things. They're just looking at, here's something with a screen that folds open and closed, has a keyboard. That must be a laptop. It's not. To an admin, to a technician, that is not a laptop. That's a Chromebook. A laptop, on the other hand, is more open. Yes, many of them will come with Windows. In fact, the cheap laptop that I found, which was in her budget, ended up being something that's designed for Windows only, but it still has local storage. I can still wipe the operating system. I don't have to reflash the BIOS or unlock the firmware or do anything funky like that. I can just install Linux. No, Linux doesn't have all of the drivers to work with the laptop. Some of the hardware on there is so cheap that it is designed to work with a Windows driver only. The Bluetooth card and the Wi-Fi chipset in particular. But okay, I went out, I bought a $20 dongle, USB connected dongle that does combo Bluetooth and Wi-Fi that does have a chipset supported within Linux. Great. There it is. We can do that. That's simple enough. And then you can install whatever software you want on it. Do you want a Java virtual machine so that you can run modded Minecraft? You can do that. You want to install other chat applications like Telegram? You can do that. You want to just run Chrome? Yeah, you can do that. Absolutely. How about WhatsApp? Yeah, you can do that. You can work with all the things you need, including local storage. You want to store your photos? You want to store videos? Yep, you can do all of that right there on your own hardware. And you have the flexibility if you want, a couple years down the road and you're like, you know what, I want to go back to Windows. You can do that. Nobody's going to, honestly, once you've grown used to using Linux. That's way better and honestly less hassle than having to deal with Windows and its, major updates every single year. So, yeah, you're not going to want to, but you have the ability to do that if you want. If you want to erase Windows and go to Linux, you can do that. You can do all of these things. That is what, in my mind, makes a proper laptop rather than an appliance that is designed to do one thing and only one thing and has a bunch of restrictions put on it to make sure that most people only do that one thing. In this case, that's a Chromebook, or it's a phone, or it's a tablet. Yes, you can bypass those restrictions, but why? If you can just get something that's $100 more, only $100 more, you can actually get an actual laptop. So this is where the conversation went, and I explained to my dad where a Chromebook will necessarily be very limiting for the staff. You can't install your payroll software. You're working almost entirely with documents within the cloud, Google Sheets, what have you. And they're like, oh yeah, we're having difficulty, because payroll stuff is not really supposed to just go into, Google Sheets in the cloud. Of course it's not. That's not at all what it's designed for. You want an actual laptop. You want something where you can install whatever applications you need. If the government says you need a particular application to go through regulatory processes, or working with internal revenue or what have you, you need the freedom to be able to do that and not go, well, but I've only got I can that what you're asking for isn't available on the Google Play Store, so I can't really do a whole lot about that. That's not useful. So I said, okay, I suggest that you look into getting laptops. There are cheaper laptops that you can get. You might even, given that you are a school, you might be able to get educational machines that are even possibly donated. I don't know. Um, I have not looked into it, so I mean, I am running off of supposition here. But fundamentally, what you need is a laptop, not a Chromebook, because the experience will be much different. You'll have the additional flexibility, and you won't be locked into the single Google cloud centric doctrine that they're trying to use and base everything on. If you're using Windows, they're trying to push you all into Microsoft's cloud, and particularly their Copilot AI thing. Not that Google's much better with pushing Gemini on everybody, to be clear. So both of these major manufacturers are trying to push people into a single direction. And yet, hardware that is open and that you can actually install whatever you want on is definitely going to be better and more flexible than hardware which has restrictions that you're going to have to jump through hoops to remove, if you do that at all. And certainly they haven't in this particular school. So there was that. There was also another conversation that I had, bonus here, when my parents needed a laptop almost 3 years back now, October 2023. I suggested that they get a Framework laptop 13 specifically, because they didn't need it to be very big. They needed it to be super portable, light. I said, okay, well, you could get other machines, but I think you should get the Framework specifically because you can repair it, you can upgrade it, you can add more capabilities to it in future should that become necessary. So I was looking at it, and my dad went, "Yeah, the screen doesn't close all the way on this laptop anymore. Maybe you could have a look at it." And I looked at it, and I'll tell you, the bottom of the laptop, nice and straight, and then the top of the cover kind of went in a curve, and I went, "Oh, that doesn't look good." I give it a little poke, and I'm like, "Ooh, that is firm. That is not, the plastic has gotten warped and it's kind of spongy now. That is firm. There's pressure under there. That is not a good thing." So I got my screwdriver, the Framework screwdriver, and I undid the screws from the bottom and lifted the top off, and the battery was quite badly pillowed. I don't know if I can find an image to show you kind of what it looks like, because I didn't take a picture at the time. Um, I was kind of just too aghast looking at this pillowing, but if I can find one, I'll put a picture right up there for you. And yeah, so I'm looking at it, and there's this, three cells that are, pretty badly bulging, and I'm going, oh, that's not good. But I tell you what, you do not have to replace your entire laptop. You can just replace the battery. Well, really? How difficult is that? It's actually not that difficult. All of the screws are captive. They're not going to come out or, fall out or do anything like that. There's 5 screws on the bottom. And then I believe there's 3 screws, either 3 or 5 screws holding the battery in place. So the trickiest part is going to be the battery cable. But even then, this repair is rated as easy and should take like 5 minutes. You're not, hugely conversant with electronics. Maybe it's not going to take you 5, maybe it'll take you 10. But I'll tell you what, let's walk through the process. We don't have the new battery, but let's walk through the process. And so I showed him which screws you're going to undo, and read through the guide and actually see how this cable will disconnect and this cable will go, and walk through it all so that you can actually get an idea of what it is you're going to do and start getting a feel for the equipment. And then we just ordered a new battery, and yeah, okay, cool. You can just order a new battery for less than $100 US, and you'll be able to replace the battery and use the laptop safely going forward, which was also an amazing thing. And I think a lot of people have forgotten, if they ever knew, the beauty of being able to just replace a part, particularly since today's machines are all glued down. Warranty void if you open it. Okay, but maybe you don't want to replace your laptop. In the case of my parents' laptop, there's a reason why the batteries failed after only 3 years, because they wouldn't normally. But the reason for this is my parents don't understand modern battery chemistry. They come from an earlier generation. If I think back, my grandmother always said, you always fill the tank on your car, the gas tank, when it's reached half full. Half. Most people that I know would just drive their car until the fuel light goes on, or if they see that it's getting low, like less than a quarter of a tank remaining, then they would fill it. My grandmother would always fill it at half, with the rationale being, well, you don't know if you're going to need a whole bunch of gas, and you don't know if gas station is going to be available. Not like there's well over 10 gas stations within a 20-minute drive. So where's the shortage going to be? It's just thinking from an earlier generation where these resources were not as common. They were a little more scarce. My parents, not that bad with the gas tank, but when it comes to the battery, they're like, oh yeah, no, I always charge it up. I try to keep it at least 80% full, and I'm always trying to charge it back up to 100%. Modern batteries do not like that. Modern batteries work best if you keep them less than 80% full. Typically speaking, I'd say try and keep it within the 40 to 80% range, even 20 to 80%. But you really only want to charge it up to 100% if you are going to have a specific need for that, because that last stretch from 80 to 100%, it puts more wear and tear on the battery. And that's where my parents were keeping it all the time, 80 to 100%. So I said, okay, so you'll get better lifetime out of your batteries if you let them discharge a little bit more. Try to keep it in the 40 to 80% range, and your battery will probably last you longer. I mean, it's great that we can get a replacement battery for your framework for less than $100 US. But if you want it to last a little bit longer in future, here's a way that you can actually work it so that it will last longer in future. So there you go. Some conversations and some basic tips. They're not super techy, they're not super high level, but they're just things that came out of conversation with relatively non-technical folks. A Chromebook is not a laptop. having a system that you can actually repair with parts does not have to be intimidating and does not have to be super technical and can actually save you a fair amount of money. And just being aware that there are people who may not understand the intricacies of modern technology, but there's some tips on reframing things. So hey, if you want better battery lifetime so that you don't have to replace the battery, here's something you can do. There you go. Some tips that were shared, and hopefully they have been interesting and enlightening for you too. If you have thoughts on other things that you would like to hear me talk about, or things that you would like to see me demonstrate, feel free to let me know right down there in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door netadmin, and we will see you next time.